introduce me and introduce you, and then we'll get started.
Okay, sounds good.
So hi, my name is Sharon Coleman. I am the host of the Perfection Rejection show, How to Finally Overcome Your Perfectionism and Get Shit Done. And I am here with licensed psychotherapist Sharon Martin, and I'm going to need to put my glasses on so I can read this wonderful blurb here. She practices in San Jose, California, and specializes in helping perfectionists and people pleasers embrace their imperfections and overcome self-doubt and shame. Her own struggle to feel good enough inspired her passion for helping others learn to accept and love themselves. Sharon writes the popular blog Happily Imperfect for PsychCentral.com and is the author of the CBT workbook for perfectionism, which I have, as you can see, flagged and written in and really devoured. So welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Such an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. So obviously we have a name in common, which is kind of fun and a little confusing.
Yeah.
But, I would love to start. So I started eating up this book and found it I love CBT because I think it's highly effective in helping us to reframe all of those false things we tell ourselves and all those conversations that we have with ourselves that beat ourselves up all the time. So CBT is super useful, and I was having so much fun going through this book, and I just started flagging. So if you want to sort of work through this book with me, I think that might be really helpful with.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can, delve into any particular things that stood out for you and answer any questions. And, I really like workbooks myself. I mean, I guess both for myself and for my clients, because I just like that really practical component of, here's some information and then here's what you can do with it. Like, here are some exercises that you can actually use to try to change some of those thoughts or some of those behaviors. So I hope that's been your experience too, that you can sort of implement some of those things rather than just read about them.
Right. Well, I think also writing really helps to get the thoughts out of us. And I think writing by hand is so much more effective than typing.
Yes.
Okay. So as I was starting, so even in your very first chapter, when you're talking about what is perfectionism, so I'm going to be on and off with the glasses this whole time.
I hear you.
Getting old thing sucks.
Yeah.
So I highlighted perfectionism is an attempt to prove that we are secure, adequate, and in control. And that really resonated with me because I'm a bit of a control freak. So can you talk a little bit to what other things perfectionism creates in us and sort of to that control aspect?
Sure. I'll say a few things first, and then maybe we can kind of circle back over to the control, because I think you're right. A lot of perfectionists will resonate with that feeling of wanting to be in control, right? Which is sometimes we want to be in control of ourselves, but sometimes it's also we want to be in control of other people, which then is not so great for relationships, right? But I think the other component, sort of the most basic piece of perfectionism, is that we're setting these impossibly high standards for ourselves, definitely for ourselves, and then, like I said, sometimes for other people as well. And it's not just that these are high standards. Sometimes people get confused and think, well, isn't it a good thing for me to want to excel and want to achieve a lot and want to do things really well? And absolutely, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's like perfectionism taken to the next level. It's like we don't want just to do well. We want it to be the best. We need to win. We need to, get the recognition. And feel like there's sort of two pieces of it. Like, one is that we want that external validation. We're looking for some outside signs, either that's somebody to tell us, or again, there's an achievement that's, we get a certain title, or we get a degree, or whatever, right? That sort of accomplishment is that then gives us, again, that message that's telling us, yep, you're good enough. Here's some proof that you're smart or you're funny or you're cute or whatever it is, right? So you can kind of see like underneath that, there's that level of insecurity. It's like, I'm not really sure on my own if I'm good enough. So I need to prove it. I need somebody outside of myself to reassure me that I am, right? So there's sort of that insecurity piece that comes along with it. And then of course, I mean, the problem is that we set such high expectations for ourselves that we can't possibly meet them. So it's really like a setup from the beginning. You know, we're never going to be able to achieve the things that we, you know, have said that we need to, not just want to, but I would say need to achieve in order to feel good about ourselves. And so it's like we're always chasing that good enough feeling, but we can never get there because we have put that bar so impossibly high. So we're always left, you know, feeling like, okay, I'm not living up, you know, to these goals. I'm not meeting the expectations that I've set or I think other people have set for me. So we're sort of in this, you know, cycle of over and over again trying to prove that we're worthy, but never being able to because of the way that we set it up. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, so it's like we need all this external validation, and almost as though we don't believe ourselves when we say, yeah, that was good enough. And so we need somebody else to tell us that it was good enough. Can you speak a little bit to how does a person get past that?
Well, I think that, you know, this first part is the recognizing that that's what we're doing, right? And I often sort of think about it like when you're like, okay, everybody, there's this, I think again, like what I am going to say probably repeatedly is that there's sort of, you know, levels of how much or how often we do these things. And, you know, for perfectionists, we're sort of doing so much of these things that it becomes problematic. Again, you know, everybody looks for some external validation. So that in and of itself is not a problem. There's a sort of a normal amount of wanting people to give you some praise, you know, going to work and wanting your boss to say, hey, good job. But the problem is when it's like our whole self-worth is based on what other people think of us. And I kind of think about that as like, that's actually a way that we're giving away a lot of our power. Like we're letting somebody else tell us how much we're worth or how valuable we are, or what we're good at, instead of being able to do that for ourselves. So, you know, back to your question, I mean, that first part is simply, okay, let's be really aware of when we're doing that. And then sort of think about, well, okay, here I am wanting, you know, let's just say my boss to tell me, you know, that I'm, you know, employee of the month. I'm, you know, the greatest, you know, cashier they've ever had working here. You know, and so I would say, well, is there a part of that maybe that you could do for yourself? Like maybe in the beginning, you're not going to let go completely of wanting some validation from your boss. But maybe you don't need that to be, you know, the sole determination of whether you think you're a good employee, or again, we can expand this to a good person, or whatever it is that we're really sort of wondering about, whether we're good enough. So often there's a little piece that, you know, you might be able to think, okay, well, can I see if, you know, there's something that I, you know, feel good about. There's a strength that I see in myself. Or maybe I can specifically go through my day looking for some evidence that might tell me whether I'm good at my job.
Right.
Right. And that's me making that call. And here's the other thing is that, you know, this is sort of getting onto another piece of it, but part of what kind of gets us hung up in this perfectionism is the way that we're thinking in these black and white, all or nothing kinds of thoughts. And this is part of what's going on in this situation. So again, if we can let go of needing it to be everything, like, you know, for my boss to say, I'm the best, I'm the employee of the month, you know, maybe I can just look for, you know, a part of the job that I'm good at. Or, you know, an example, like I was saying, you know, a customer, you know, gives me a compliment or something like that. You know, maybe I can hold on to that and say, well, it's not the same as, you know, being employee of the month, certainly, But maybe I don't need it to be all of that all of the time, right? Maybe I can hold on to some of these small pieces of it.
Yeah, I apologize. My kids are just getting home from school. So
oh, that's okay.
They were told to go straight downstairs, so hopefully that happens. Yeah, so talking back to what you're saying about, so we have this tendency to do this all or nothing thinking, right? So it's you don't do one thing perfect, and then that starts to translate into I'm not good enough. Like I didn't do that well enough, and because I couldn't do the thing, I'm therefore not good enough. So we tend to transfer it onto who we are.
Yes, right. So anything that's not perfect becomes, a piece of, yes, a defining, piece of who I am, rather than, I'm still me, I'm still good enough, even though I screwed up this one particular thing.
Right. And I think in a lot of ways, it can almost become debilitating. So that was sort of one of the next points that you get to in your workbook. You start to talk about fear, and having your readers define their own personal definition of perfectionism, which was an interesting exercise, I gotta tell you. But can you talk a little bit about how fear plays in and how we can overcome that as well?
Yeah. So sort of like the insecurity that we were talking about, there's often this sort of level of anxiety or fear that's underlying it. And some of that is that fear that, I'm not good enough. It's fear that somebody's going to criticize me or reject me, which again is sort of an outward sign of somebody specifically saying, hey, you're not good enough, right? We don't like what you're doing, or we don't like you. And it's also, fear of failure. Sometimes it's even fear of success. Interestingly enough, often those are not as different as they might seem.
No.
So that sort of fear, I would say, like I said, it's just sort of like under the surface, and sort of is driving that perfectionism. That, another way to sort of look at it is also to think, well, if I stop doing some of my perfectionist behaviors, most people will feel very anxious, right? Whatever that is for them, right? If it's, I don't proofread my email before I send it, I'm going to feel anxious about that. Or if I
horrifying.
If I don't clean up the kitchen before I go to bed, I'm going to feel really unsettled about that. It's not going to feel right for me. So it's like often these perfectionistic behaviors are a way of sort of calming that anxiety for ourselves, and just like, again, sort of coming back to the idea of control and feeling like, okay, I'm in control. Like this is something that I can do. I can control, when I send that email, how many times I reread it, or what I put in it, right? Or how much time I spend cleaning that kitchen, or so on and so forth, right? It's a sense of like, okay, that's a piece of control for me, even though we may say, in the big scheme of things, none of those things are really that important. They feel very important in the moment, right?
Because they do. That's funny because you bring up the email, and I am not an attention to detail person. I'm a big picture person, right? And so I'll proof the email, I'll send out the email, and invariably the's something, a typo or I messed up. And then I feel horrible. And of course, nobody notices. And if they do, they don't care.
Exactly. Well, and see, that's what you're saying, and what you're doing right there is that way of sort of healthy reframing of that situation, which is to say, this isn't really that important. Most people aren't even going to notice. And if they do, they're not going to judge me just based on whether I have, a spelling or a grammar mistake in this email. That's not really what's the most important, part of the email, right? But for other people, that does, that can be an example of something that feels just really, really painful. And they do have that fear that people are going to look down on them and think poorly of them. They're not going to get, hired for the job, or the friends are going to be laughing about them, or whatever that fear is. But like I said, what you're doing there and really modeling very nicely for folks is like, that's you can shift away from that and sort of doing some of that reality testing for yourself and saying, okay, like how important is that? Should I really be spending a lot of time, redoing my emails so that they're just right? Probably not, right? In most situations, that's not warranted. It's not, helpful. And it just, it just sort of gets us, it does. It wastes a lot of time. Perfectionists can waste a lot of time, redoing and perfecting things that aren't important, essentially.
Right. Right.
Yeah, they just
fiddling with the details of the website till it's just perfect, and
absolutely,
and that
yes,
changes in a couple of years anyways. So yeah, I know for a lot of the audience who are entrepreneurs who are listening to this, sending off an email, I would imagine that for the most part, most people have a handle on that kind of small things, but that I think it translates into the bigger projects that we have that we're putting out into the world, and that fear of being judged based on those projects, or having the projects flop and you've put all this time and energy into it. So your book delves deeper and gets harder. Delving deeper always gets harder.
Yeah.
And you go on to talking about sort of where those perfectionist beliefs come from. I always struggle with books like this because the minute you say your parents, I'm like, which ones? I was a foster kid, so which ones? I have everybody's garbage.
Complicated, yeah,
complicated. So can you talk a little bit about sort of getting to the root of it and how that helps us get past it?
Yeah, and I'll say, I think sometimes also people get tired of the idea of talking about, well, what did your parents do that kind of, created these problems for you? And it really isn't about trying to blame your parents for all the stuff that they did wrong. Most parents do the best that they can. But it is true that we've, excuse me, we are very influenced by our childhood experiences and by the people who raised us. So, there is sort of no getting around the fact that they have a huge influence on us, because we spend a lot of time with them, but also because when we're small and we don't have a lot of life experience, our brain is not fully developed, so we are little sponges. We are taking in, everything that people tell us, and the experiences that we have do become sort of foundational in, some of our, our traits and behaviors and personalities and the ways that we're thinking. So there definitely is a component that we can think about, okay, well, what are sort of some of those messages that I got from my parents? Either things that they overtly said to us, or the behavior that we saw from them and how they were treating themselves or treating others, the behaviors that they were doing. So sometimes parents, it's pretty straightforward that, our parents were perfectionists themselves as well, in sort of that classic sense. And, we just saw them doing a lot of perfectionistic behaviors. The other thing that's maybe a little bit different is sometimes parents really they're not so much perfectionists themselves, but they demand perfection from their kids. They're very harsh and very demanding. The standards are very rigid. And there's often very harsh consequences for the kids not living up to those expectations. So it's, don't just be a straight A student, but you need to get all A pluses, and you need to be, first chair in the band, and you need to be, the quarterback, and, the best of everything. And really, again, sort of probably in most situations, impossibly high standards that are being expected of kids. And sometimes that's even that the parents are trying to, sort of feel good about themselves through their kids, like the child becomes their source of accomplishment almost, right? It's, if you want your kid to, have to go to Harvard or, whatever, it's not even just because I think that's best for my kid. It's because, that will make me look so good and I'll feel so important. And like, I'm, such a fabulous parent because my kid is achieving all of this stuff. So those are, a couple of pieces, and I don't know how much time you want to spend on the parent piece, but I mean, there's some other, dynamics that parents can certainly contribute. But then we also have, the larger society, culture, religion, so many other things, the media, social media these days that of course have a huge impact, again, on how we feel about ourselves and the expectations that we're setting for ourselves. And I think, so much of it is unfortunately comparison, feeling inadequate in comparison to what we see other people doing or what other people look like. And again, on some level, I think we all know that, so many of those photos are airbrushed, or people are just putting, the best moments of their life on Instagram. Like, we know that logically, but somehow emotionally, it just still feels really crappy. To be sitting at your house, having a hard day, feeling like nothing's going right, and seeing your friend, with her,
the perfect life.
Right. Doing something fabulous, and, the kids who are adorable and, on vacation or whatever that scenario is. So, I mean, it's tough. I think we live in a, a tough time when we're getting so much information inputted all of the time that tells us what we should be doing and, what we should be looking like, and how much we should be achieving and how much we should be earning, and, so on and so forth, that it's really hard to, clear out, I think, a lot of that clutter in our minds about what really, what is it that really matters to me, versus, all that external noise.
It's funny that actually doing these interviews, it was fun to get to teach my 9-year-old about the magic of the internet. Because, we've got this beautiful background here in my son's playroom. Take my computer and you see the reality.
Right. No, it's awesome. Right.
Yeah, it doesn't really look like that everywhere else. I just thought of myself on my beautiful backdrop here.
No, it's such a good example, though, because that's probably the case for most people. We're cropping out the mess.
Exactly.
We're airbrushing our wrinkles out and all that kind of stuff. And it really, I mean, it isn't reality anymore. Most of what we're seeing.
Reality TV is not real.
No.
And I think it does. It for those of us who do struggle with feelings of needing to be perfect or feeling like we aren't enough, I think having that constant bombardment of the social just makes it that much harder to step back from it.
Yeah, I really think
for sure. So we already talked about that note. Moving on to the next. I need my glasses again. So very imperfect. So in your chapter where you talk about self-criticism to self-compassion, which is part of the healing, I think, for most of our negative self-talk, you say perfectionism gives us an inaccurate perception of ourselves. We become internally focused on our imperfections and failures, which we try to keep hidden from everyone else. Like my beautiful room here. And then you have us identify various strengths, which was really useful. But I think I want to get to something I found hilarious. And I went and checked.
Okay.
There was a checklist in here of all of the little, maybe you can help me find it. I had it bookmarked. There was a long checklist of these are features of perfectionism that you might possess.
It's probably earlier than where you are. I'm guessing it's probably maybe in chapter 2, maybe.
Okay.
Are you testing my
testing your knowledge of your own book?
Of my own book, exactly. I know there's a few different checklists.
Well, if I can't find it, it's
page. Look at page 14. Is that the one that you're thinking?
I'm going to be very impressed if that's right. My gosh, you are so smart. Look at that.
It does help if you wrote
I don't know if
not to say I couldn't do the same on other things, but
I don't know if you can see it, but I think there were 3 or 4 that I did not check.
Yeah.
I'm like, Well, now I want it to be perfect. I just want to check them all.
I'll be the perfect perfectionist, right? And have all the symptoms, right?
Every last symptom.
Yeah.
And I mean, I highly recommend if you are struggling with this at all, for those of you who are watching, get this book. I mean, if nothing else, just to find out how bad you've got it, where to work through. Obviously, I use humor to deflect, as you're finding out. But yeah, so I just found this book wonderful and useful. And I'm not done because I think it's not, I usually read a book in one sitting. This is not a one sitting read.
No, it's not. And no, it's, well, and I will, say to everybody, I mean, that truly trying to sort of undo a lot of these behaviors and thoughts, it's not like a one afternoon, right, endeavor. So don't, I mean, I think we all know it's hard because it's like on some level, like, well, I would have figured this out already if it was easy. But no, absolutely. It's the kind of thing that I think you put in some work, you sort of let it absorb, you practice with it, you kind of work on it. Maybe you come back to some of the exercises or read some of it again. And, there is definitely, I mean, really, I guess like learning anything else, right? I mean, it takes practice, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes self-compassion because, you're going to inevitably try to apply something and it's not going to go exactly the way you wanted it to be. You're not going to just eliminate all those thoughts right away. But again, hopefully part of the process of undoing the perfectionism is also saying that you don't have to even sort of do the exercises perfectly in order for them to be beneficial. And you don't have to eliminate every negative thought or every perfectionist thought in order for there to be significant improvement in your life. It's very much that middle ground of let me try to find that sort of happy medium where, for a lot of people, they actually really like the idea of being able to hold on to some of those perfectionist thoughts or behaviors. Like, for example, somebody who is very detail oriented, they might say, well, I don't want to stop being detail oriented, right? That would be, not good for my job. I use that, skill. It's very helpful in certain situations. And that's fine, right? I mean, that makes perfect sense. A lot of times we just need to dial it back a little bit. We just need to find that space where, okay, I can be detail oriented about the things that require that where that's really going to be helpful. But I don't, if I'm a pharmacist, I need to be detail oriented and making sure I get the right medication in the right amount, to the right people. But like you were saying, I mean, that might not mean I don't need to be detail oriented about my personal emails. Like that's something that I could let go of, and I could find a place where there's some balance there of where I need to be more detail oriented and where I don't, right? Instead of, like perfectionists, like we're just blanket, like apply it to every single thing we do all the time, because otherwise it doesn't feel right.
Right. I think, excuse me, working through something like this certainly helps us with sort of our overall issues in day-to-day life as we're going through. But let's say somebody has a big project they plan on shipping. They've just finished an online course they're going to put out into the public, or they've just finished writing a book and they're planning to publish that. I think we're going to get some more kid noise in a minute. The bus just so let's say something like that is on their to-do list and they're finding and this actually happened for me when I published my book, that perfectionism was holding them back on just getting it out there at all, just even the shipping part. Do you have anything that somebody could do sort of like Band-Aid style to help them in that moment when they're just, I mean, a lot of times you hear just do it. Well, just do it doesn't necessarily work when there's a lot of emotion coming up around it. Right.
Like we've been saying, I mean, there definitely is some shifting that we can do, with our thoughts so that we are not, almost sort of like catastrophizing about how awful it's going to be if there's a typo in that book, or how awful it's going to be if, there's some mistake, in the course. Right. I mean, because again, this is part of us being more realistic with ourselves, is accepting that there will be mistakes. There will be. I'm sure there are typos in my book. There are probably some in your book. Where, I mean, it's just an inevitable piece of life and being human is that we are going to make mistakes. So I think part of what's helpful is, coming back to that realistic place and saying, okay, like I need to get okay with the fact that I can't avoid the mistakes. I can't avoid there being bad reviews or, negative comments or people who don't like it, people who ask for a refund or whatever that situation is. That is part of the process, right? And so part of it is also us sort of building up some tolerance around that. And we do have to expose ourselves to it in order to build up the tolerance, right? If we never create anything or we just create it, and leave it in the desk drawer, well, of course, nobody's going to write any bad reviews about the book that they never read, right? So if we're going to put anything out in the world, we have to accept that it's not going to please everybody. That's not the goal, right? My goal is not to write a book for every single person in the whole wide world that everybody's going to love, right?
And you don't get any good reviews if you don't ship either.
Absolutely. And probably for most people, the good, the positive is going to outweigh the negative. I mean, I feel pretty confident in saying that for, pretty much anybody. I think you're going to get a lot more positive feedback. Again, we don't want to get too attached to the positive feedback either. But what happens with our perfectionist thinking is that, you might get 20 positive reviews and one negative review, but all you remember is the negative, right? That's all you hold on to. And that becomes, I'm a crappy author, I'm a crappy, course designer, there's something wrong with me. And that's a flawed way of thinking about things, right? We are completely discounting all of the positives and only looking at the negatives. It's
sorry.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Why is it that we do that? Why do we tend to focus, we can get 20 positives and the negative is the one that sticks out.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that we do that?
Well, I think a lot of psychologists, have, at least, hypothesized that there's probably some evolutionary component to that was useful in, many, many generations past, but being able to, sort of sense danger and pay attention to things that might be wrong in our environment might have been sort of a survival instinct, right? But it's not too useful for us in this day and age. But I think the other piece is honestly, a lot of it is a habit. It's sort of, sort of some of those neurological pathways in our brains that the more you use them, the stronger they become. They can absolutely be undone, right? We can make those, pathways weaker and others stronger, the pathways that are looking for the positive. It takes the effort, right? It takes that practice again of specifically, saying to yourself, okay, here I am again, only noticing the positives. Let me instead make note of the fact that here are 20 good reviews. Those are more, there are way more, right, positives than negatives here. I'm going to choose to focus on those. I'm going to, continue to, read over those or, remind myself of those. And for some people, it's actually is helpful, to have a little practice either at the end of the day or just occasionally when they're feeling kind of down about things. But to be able to, look back again for sort of some tangible proof, like, okay, here is some evidence that I am good enough at whatever, fill in the blank. So I've had clients who have, kept a little email, folder on their email where they just put, the praise that they got from some clients or, some positive feedback or something. Because so often when you're sort of in that real negative, headspace, you can't even access that, that piece of, all those reminders. Like, yeah, on some level, again, you may know they're there, but it's hard to, think of a specific time that, oh, I did get some positive feedback or, something, somebody noticed something. And again, like I was saying, earlier on, I think probably, equally important or maybe even more important is that you might just, write down some things for yourself, not necessarily just things that other people have said or that external piece, but really think again, like, let me access, what are some of my strengths? What are some of the things that I'm proud of? What are some of my good qualities that aren't necessarily just sort of achievement outcome driven? Because it can sometimes be a trap that we fall into too, is really just, focusing so much on the outcome of things rather than, trying to think about the benefits of the process of doing something. So again, I mean, if you want to think about, those examples of creating a course or writing a book, certainly the outcome is important. I'm not going to say it's not, but I think when we have a mindset of there's also a lot of benefit for me along the road. Hopefully there's a lot of growth that comes through that process of creating that course. Maybe there are relationships that are formed, there are, lessons that are learned, so there's, lots of good stuff in the in-between place too, that, it's not just about, how positive book reviews or how many copies of the book did I sell, but, there's other benefits as well.
Right. I think if you're going with a traditional publisher, how many copies of the book you sell becomes very important to somebody.
Well, and again, I mean, that's, that it's not to say, like I said, that we can completely discount that and just say, oh, that's not important.
Right. No.
No, right. I mean, if you're, creating a course and part of it is, you want to, earn some income, then, right, we can't just be blind to that. But often we have other goals as well. It also might be, I really want to help some people with this. Or this is for my own personal development. I'm going to learn some things, through the course of doing this project. So, like I was saying, I mean, but I think it is hard, again, to just sort of clear out what are other people's goals and objectives that they're, repeating to us. And we may agree with it, at least in part, but maybe, the publisher's goal is 100% how many, copies of this book can I sell? I might say, well, that's, part of my goal, but that's not, there are other goals that I have as well.
Right. I also feel like, and I've experienced this in what I've put out into the world, is when you're doing it in service to others, and that is your bigger goal, the other stuff takes care of itself.
Yeah, it does, because again, I think that sometimes it's easier for us to say, okay, well, I recognize that, I've definitely helped some people with this project. I'm not, again, realistically, I'm not going to help every single person in the world, with this project. But often it does feel really good to say, well, I know I've helped 1, 2, 10, 100, whatever that is. Like I definitely have helped other people, and that makes it worthwhile.
Absolutely. You definitely, I haven't, like I said, I haven't finished, but I mean, even just getting halfway through, it's definitely been a useful tool that I will be probably referring back to. So even helped one person.
Well, thank you. And I think, again, I mean, sometimes, like you were saying, I mean, like, that is a good way of reframing that. Like, it doesn't need to be perfect to be helpful to people either.
Right. That's for sure. That's for sure.
And I think there is value in also just, modeling our imperfections and, taking ownership, for the things that we don't do perfectly. Because that, I mean, that also becomes a way that we relate to each other, right? I think it's, in that very small way, it's like when you show us how messy, the floor is at your house, other people can relate to that in a way that feels probably more meaningful, than thinking, oh, look at Sharon's, perfect house over there. It's so nicely decorated, so neat and clean, and like mine's not. So I can't really relate to what what's going on for her. It's like we become human in a whole different way when we let people see that, things are a mess at my house, or things are difficult for me. Everything's not always fantastic.
Right. Yeah, we let ourselves be a little bit human for each other.
Exactly. Because like I said, I mean, that's where the magic of connection happens is, I want to know that, you're basically as screwed up as I am, right? That you're struggling as much as I am.
Right.
I don't want to, find a friend or a business partner who's got it all together all of the time, because I'm always going to feel less than in that situation, right?
Right, for sure. And nobody likes that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So did you have a giveaway that you were going to do for the audience?
Yes. Thank you for reminding me.
I couldn't remember if you did.
I do. I have a couple of things that are all bundled together. So there is a free copy of chapter 6, I believe, from the book, which is the chapter on procrastination. So there's that as a PDF download. And then there is also a set of 30 journal prompts for perfectionism and 30 affirmations. All specifically for perfectionists. So hopefully that will be useful. So a few good little tools in there.
I didn't get to chapter, well, no, I got to chapter 6 and then I put it off.
Right? Procrastination chapter. I know.
I think that's where I stopped, actually. Maybe chapter 5.
Well, anyway, that is the chapter about procrastination, which we didn't talk too much about, but that's often that struggle too that we have of like, if I can't do it perfectly, I just won't do it, right?
Right. Which is huge. I think
it's
probably the number one reason most of us put things off.
Yeah. So I picked out that one as the free chapter because I was hoping that would be useful for folks, and just thinking, kind of like what you were talking about, that often we have a lot of ideas. Sometimes we have a lot of half-started projects that never get finished because, basically we get in our own way, and think, it's not going to be good enough. There's, some reason I can't do it. And so hopefully we can tackle some of the, those thinking errors that get in our way, so that we can say, okay, I can get this done, and here's some specific strategies to get started.
Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So there will be a link on your speaker page to that download. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.